Speaking of COVID, probably the most important national news comes to us from Just the News. The headline tells us, Appeals Court upholds decision barring Biden admin from colluding with big tech to censor. The article reads, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals on Friday upheld a low court decision in Missouri versus Biden barring the federal government from working with social media companies to remove First Amendment protected content. Now, this would include federal agencies like the FBI and the CDC, the White House, the Surgeon General. So this includes White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre and Surgeon General Vivek Murthy. Just the News reports from the court decision, which says, defendants and their employees and agents shall take no actions, formal or informal, directly or indirectly, to coerce or significantly encourage social media companies to remove, delete, suppress, or reduce, including through altering their algorithms, posted social media content containing protected free speech. That includes, but is not limited to, compelling the platforms to act, such as by intimating that some form of punishment will follow a failure to comply with any request, or supervising, directing, or otherwise meaningfully controlling the social media company's decision-making process. Long story short, the White House and these other agencies like the FBI and the CDC were working directly with social media companies like Meta or Facebook to suppress content or punish accounts which published content that disagreed with the Biden administration's positions on COVID vaccines and other things. The initial injunction was filed in July, with the listed plaintiffs being the state of Missouri, the state of Louisiana, and there were 5 individuals, which we'll talk about later. And then there was a list of defendants that was a mile long. Like, it took up the whole bottom of the page. Among the 40 individuals listed there are President Joe Biden, Secretary of Health and Human Services Xavier Becerra, Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas, Director of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Jen Easterly, Robert Silvers, he's also from Homeland Security, White House Digital Director Rob Flaherty, he's gone now, but there was also FBI agent Elvis Chan, and there were 13 government agencies in total listed. In other words, there was a whole slew of Biden cronies that were working fist and glove with social media companies to censor free speech, a direct violation of the First Amendment to the Constitution. It goes without saying, but the First Amendment specifically reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, and here we go, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, these fundamental liberties are summarized as the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, the freedom of assembly, and the freedom to petition. Now, this wasn't simply the slapping of the informative, fact-checking disinformation labels on every post that disagreed with the regime. You probably saw those all over the place. This also had to do with having these platforms suppress or throttle content that they deemed misinformation, otherwise known as information they disagree with. That means that conservative media figures, prominent Christian leaders, and conservative media outlets were shadow banned and suppressed, while legacy media outlets and prominent journalists and talking heads were promoted. So while it's not specifically Congress making a law against free speech, as the amendment specifically mentions, it is the federal government preventing Americans from speaking in the digital public square. The initial filing read, the principal function of free speech under the United States system of government is to invite dispute. It may indeed serve its high purpose when it induces a condition of unrest, creates dissatisfaction with conditions as they are, or even stirs people to anger. Freedom of speech and press is the indispensable condition of nearly every other form of freedom. It even quotes a few of our founding fathers like George Washington saying, "The freedom of speech may be taken away, and dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter." Benjamin Franklin is quoted saying, "Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the free acts of speech." Thomas Jefferson is quoted in the filing as saying, "Reason and inquiry are the only effectual agents against error." Now, I love what the Attorney General from Missouri said. Andrew Bailey said, "The First Amendment remains intact. The first brick was laid in the wall of separation between tech and state on July 4th, and this ruling is yet another brick. Missouri will continue to lead the way in the fight to defend our most fundamental freedoms, but we're not done yet. We're just getting started." So he's referring to the preliminary injunction on July 4th, which immediately barred all of these defendants from colluding with and working together with these social media and tech companies. But then the decision became official on September 8th when the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals partially upheld the decision, specifically preventing Joe Biden, the Surgeon General, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Department of Health and Human Services, and also Anthony Fauci, from further cooperation with these companies. This federal court consisted of a three-judge panel, so they affirmed parts of the injunction, they reversed parts of it, they vacated parts of it, and they modified other parts. But here's what the court said. For the past few years, at least since the 2020 presidential transition, a group of federal officials has been in regular contact with nearly every major American social media company about the spread of misinformation on their platforms. In their concern, those officials, hailing from the White House, the CDC, the FBI, and a few other agencies, urged the platforms to remove disfavored content and accounts from their sites. And the platforms seemingly complied. They gave the officials access to an expedited reporting system. They downgraded or removed flagged posts and deplatformed users. The platforms also changed their internal policies to capture more flagged content and sent steady reports on their moderation activities to the officials. That went on through the COVID-19 pandemic, the 2022 congressional election, and continues to this day. This day means September 8th, 13 days ago. The court says, the plaintiffs, 3 doctors, a news website, which is the Daily Wire, a healthcare activist, and 2 states had posts and stories removed or downgraded by the platforms. Their content touched on a host of divisive topics like the COVID-19 lab leak theory, pandemic lockdowns, vaccine side effects, election fraud, and the Hunter Biden laptop story. The plaintiffs maintained that although the platforms stifled their speech, the government officials were the ones pulling the strings. They coerced, threatened, and pressured the social media platforms to censor them through private communications and legal threats. Next, they mentioned that officials began communicating with social media companies, including Facebook, Twitter, now known as X, YouTube, and Google in early 2021. From the outset, that came with requests to take down flagged content. This ruling goes on to detail specific actions and emails and messages between the 2 parties. Now, in the initial lawsuit, the states of Louisiana and Missouri said this was the most egregious violations of the First Amendment in the history of the United States of America. What do you think about that? Let me know what you think in the comment section. But if we agree with our founding fathers that God has granted every human being certain unalienable rights, that among these are life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and we agree with Judge Doughty that freedom of speech and freedom of the press is the indispensable condition of nearly every other form of freedom, then we must fight for and defend this fundamental freedom. That means that if we can't speak, we can't defend our other natural rights, our God-given rights and our civil rights. We can't defend life. We can't defend freedom. We can't defend the institutions of the Lord, the family, the church, marriage, etc. And so, speak we must, but of course, in love. Getting quality, good-priced meat products is proving to be increasingly difficult these days. With Bidenflation, the prices of everything in store is just going through the roof. When you make fuel more expensive, that costs the farmer more. It costs the shipper more. It costs the grocer more. And it costs you more. That's why you need to check out Good Ranchers. They'll ship directly to your house. They're 100% American beef, chicken, seafood, and pork, all sourced from independent farms in the United States. Check the link in my show notes and use the code RANCHER10 for 10% off. That's the number 10 off their best-selling Ranchers Classic box.